Hey everyone, welcome back. I don't know what happened with the last episode. Seemed like it just cut off. Like I didn't press anything. I wonder if I do that, does it end? No. If I do that, does it end? No. Huh. So I don't know what happened. It didn't tell me if it overheats. It'll tell me it turned off because it overheated. Let me make sure it looks how I want it to look. So you're gonna see the sunset over the valley. I've got a portable heater here and a headlamp in case I need it. I might kick the heater on right now, guys. It's already kind of cold. This is episode 4 for Cordova for the first series. Still not sure how I'm going to cut it all because I'm not sure how long each one's going to be. But here we go. I'll turn my chair just a little bit and scoot forward just a little bit. Okay. The heater's going. It feels really nice. Cool. I got this lamp for when it gets dark. And we're going to set, we're still recording. You can clearly see that. We're going to set a timer for Woo! Are getting already getting mighty warm. We're gonna make sure Winchester has enough heat too. Oh yeah, you can see the red, guys. Can you see that red? Okay. Um. All right, so we started a 55-minute timer, and yeah, this works how I want it to. Okay. So we were in the middle. I checked the footage, and as far as I can tell, we were in the middle of the third paragraph of part 3 of Taos Bridge. We're going to the Taos greater area tomorrow, and I'll be there for 5 days. So um, we're going to go around to the different sites and try to in both the mountain ranges and check out some Santa Fe stuff and look specifically at Taos. The headlines are full of pejorative comments on Hitler and Tojo, the Huns and the Japs. We live in a small town, one of those referred to as quote-unquote section towns, and that are strung across southern Wyoming. Its sole reason for existence is as a fueling stop for the railroad train. It represents ooh, it represents a quote section of the railroad. My father works on the railroad. My mother's only sibling, her younger brother, is quote in the war, stationed, he reminds us, in the safe haven of Hawaii as a quote unquote pencil pusher to quote unquote general headquarters. His letters nonetheless come to us with the marks of the censor, so that the portions of his letters that address his duties are blacked out. We know only that he loves and misses us. The imagination of my family runs rampant with worry over the blackened portions. I don't know why I cut out last time. So successful are the advertised courses over which my father and I labor that I know how to read at the age of 4. I enter school shortly before my 5th birthday. My father had only 3 years of formal schooling. He attended school in Taos, New Mexico, from the time he was 9 until he was 12. This is crazy. At the age of 12, he left with his older brother to become a cowboy in Montana. His father, who had been in his 40s when he married my grandmother, had suffered a stroke. My father and his brother left home to supplement the family's income, so Willie and Solus. My father's previous experience with schools had happened much earlier in an Indian community in southeastern Colorado. The government established a school and the children were duly rounded up and deposited in the schoolhouse. The schoolmaster locked the door after the children were seated. He cut their hair, threw their braids into the pot-bellied stove, and paraded in front of the classroom, slapping his palm with a steel-edged yardstick. Once, my father said, an official came to inspect the school. He was surprised that the quote-unquote children, some of whom were young adults, could neither read nor write. First, said the schoolmaster, I must teach them how to sit in a classroom. Not too long after the inspector left, the schoolmaster, as was his manner, headed down the aisle between desks to punish a squirming student with a yardstick brandished before him. The student stood and rushed to meet the teacher, grabbed the ruler from the teacher's hand, and broke it over his own knee. As the teacher stood stunned, the student threw the pieces of the ruler into the stove and proceeded to exit the schoolhouse through an open window. The rest of the students sat in awe. The teacher wandered back to his desk, sat down, and said, not a word. The students, one by one, climbed out the window. The next day, someone reported that the teacher had left town. This is why my father did not begin a formal education until he was 9 years old. So this was before they moved to Taos, and then before he went to Montana to be a cowboy. So this was in Colorado. This was a very young schooling experience. She's not telling the story necessarily. She's not telling her family history necessarily in the order that it happened. She has a way of unfolding it to help you see something, we can say. My sister and I found it incredible that my father would have left home at the age of 12 to, quote, be a cowboy. People who are 12, we argued, are only children. As an adult, however, I had the good fortune to see a class picture of the New Mexico school my father attended. The year is 1918. My father is 12 years old. He stands in the back row, lined up with the school's teachers. He stands apart from them and is immediately recognizable to those who knew him. His hair, which at that time in his life was bright red, stands straight up from his head in kinked curls and frames a countenance that is most similar to one's idea of the Viking berserker. I had no doubt then that my father, at the age of 12, could decide to go to Montana to be a cowboy. He sent home money every month to his parents. He did not go home for his father's funeral, only returning to his mother's home when he was 30 years old. 18 years later, he arrived in 1936 in fine gabardine clothes with rings on his fingers. He was driving a bright yellow convertible Cord automobile. His once unruly hair had turned jet black and clung in soft curls to his friendly, and many would say, handsome face. The birds are nice right now. Look at that, you guys. He came to visit with his mother. While he was there, he met and fell in love with my mother. The local priest refused to marry them, objecting that my father was not a, quote, true Catholic, until my father slipped the priest $50. I was born in the fall of 1937. 4. Part 4 of Taos Bridge. And I think this is the last part, or the last, because I've been calling the bigger things parts too, sorry. Book 1, Book 2, Book 3, Book 4, Book 5, whatever. We call them parts, chapters, and sections. So our chapter is Taos Bridge, and we're in section 4. Most chapters do not have sections. That might not be true. No, that's true. Most chapters don't have sections. They take strange forms, but they don't. Most of them don't have sections. What is it that initiates the search for one's own history? Is it a search for explanation? Is it a search for explanation? For justification? Where do those actions come from that seem so natural and yet seem so out of step with the people around us? Or why is it that I look different from the others? Do I feel different because people ask about where I came from or want to know my background? They do not seem so ready to ask such questions of themselves. Are you Oriental? They ask. Am I? Once, when my second daughter was around 6 or 7 years old, this is the section where Cordova is talking about her family, her life as an adult, and her children. Also, some about her father and her as a child, still though. Mom, Mom, she calls when she doesn't immediately see me. When she catches sight of me, she asks quickly, am I Chinese? I respond that she is not. Without waiting for an explanation, she quickly runs out the door, only to return a few minutes later. Again, without explanation, she bursts into the door and asks, am I Hawaiian? She gets from me a very quizzical shake of no. She comes back a third time. This time she seems not so much in a hurry. What am I? She asks and pauses for my answer. Who wants to know? I ask. She tells me that she is playing in the schoolyard a few minutes away, and there is a crew of young men installing a sprinkler system. One of them, she says, is a Samoan, and he wants to know if I am one of them. She has been alerted to her difference. She stares long and with interest at her image in the hall mirror. We're Indians, I tell her. She turns around quickly. Indian? She stretches out the term with shock and amazement. She wants to know if her stepfather is a quote-unquote Indian. No, I say, he isn't. I also am amazed that she has so readily signaled out a difference. Well, she drawls, with a bit of impatience, what is he? Oh, I try to slow her impatience. Welsh, Irish, maybe a little bit of German. She comments that that's a lot of things. I inform her that we also have some Spanish blood in us. She looks at me with exasperation. I thought I was just a plain old American. She approaches her inquiry about history through having confronted her difference from her playmates. Young men installing a sprinkler system are not her playmates. I, as an adult, confront my difference through a clash of value systems and ways of acting in the world. I don't know. I don't feel like young children should be interacting with random adults. Um, I'm not saying that adults can't play with children, children can't have adult playmates, but I am saying that they should be like family or something, or teachers or something. My gosh, you guys, I am so congested already. I don't know. I hope I don't get sick. I, as an adult, confront my difference through a clash of value systems and ways of acting in the world. For example, I cannot ask for anything. I cannot command others to do my bidding. Your room is messy, I announce to my children. The garbage can is full. Shortly after my announcement, someone begins to clean a room or to rush out the door with the garbage can. That is the way it is supposed to happen. One day, my husband says to me with much annoyance, "Do you want me to take out the garbage? If you do, then say so." I am shocked. I've been found out. I actually did want someone to take the garbage can out for me. I should not have said anything. "No," I mutter, somewhat confused. "I'll take it out." But he knows that I don't want to take out the garbage. I am busy. I am cooking. "Why can't you just ask?" he says. Why can't I? No one in my family gives orders. That is one of the differences between us and them. They are always commanding others to do something, demanding that someone specific do some specific thing. It takes me years to find out why I do the things that I do, and in the way that I do them. My value system is built around the concept of a human being that says that all humans are equal and therefore deserving of respect. Who am I to command another to do my bidding? I remember that my father would announce his needs. A cold glass of water is a good thing on a hot day. I sure am thirsty. Someone would get him a glass of water or offer an excuse as to why they could not do so. An excuse would mean that he would have to drop everything he was doing to come indoors for a glass of water, and he would do so without complaint. Just as one cannot tell another person what to do, one also cannot one can also not ask for anything. To ask for something is to imply an inability to be independent. To ask for anything is to imply to the person asked that he or she has failed to be perceptive to the others. Has failed to be perceptive to the other's existence or needs. Telling another what to do implies a position of command that no human being or no real human being would presume to take upon him or herself. There are no rules that say, "Thou shalt not tell another person what to do." There is a gradual understanding that that is the way things stand. When I was a child, my sister and I slept in a large bed with a tall brass headboard. We entertained ourselves by using the bed as a trampoline. Once my father heard our jumping and shouts of joy. When he appeared at the door, we stopped our jumping. He proceeded to show us how the bed was constructed. He told us that many of the parts were irreplaceable. He showed us how the parts could break. He told us of the potential hazards to our health of falling as the bed broke under our jumps. After he had finished his instructional discourse, he smoothed the bed over. My younger brother sat on it and gave a few bounces. My father left the room. We inspected the bed, saw again how it was put together. imagined ourselves with various broken parts, arms, ankles, wrists, elbows, and even heads, said my little brother, and never used the bed as a trampoline again. Guys, look at that horizon. Blue to red to yellow. Cold, buddy? Oh, does it feel good? Stay. That's a pretty bird. Big orange breast. You sound pretty too. Okay. I never used the bed as a trampoline again. Another time my father had bought us a rather tricky toy. It was a wagon that could be ridden like a sled. It had metal wheels with rubber treads. We quickly discovered that the treads could be removed and that the metal wheels would make sparks on the sidewalk and also created a wonderful noise. Again, my father showed us why the wagon sled was constructed the way it was, why the rubber coatings were placed over the steering mechanism and the tires. My sister, brother, and I continued to remove the rubber coatings. One of us was stabbed by the steering mechanism. We tried to hide the injury that could not be hidden. I was ashamed to tell my father of how I had been injured. I had undertaken my actions on the wagon sled with full knowledge of what could happen if the rubber coatings were removed. I was responsible for my own accident. I had, in effect, caused it. I think we'll leave that off for a little bit longer, the light, the lamp. My father cleansed and wrapped my mangled finger. My sister and brother stood by, filled with shame. We were all three ashamed. We had acted out of willful disregard of rational information given us by our father. My father had not one word of recrimination. I was bandaged and comforted. My father, however, had another task to perform before the episode could be called done. He went outside and chopped the wagon sled to pieces with an axe. He did not do this in anger, but rather went about the task carefully and methodically. We watched, and we also helped pick up the pieces for deposit into the garbage can. We knew exactly what he was doing and why. No discussion was necessary. Ugh. Just trying to stretch. At the age of 15, and after passing the driving course at school, I qualified for my driver's license. My father and I rode the bus into town with the rest of the driving graduates and their parents, and we all received our driver's licenses. The bus driver allowed us to have a couple of hours in town before we had to go home. My father and I agreed to meet at the bus stop in 2 hours. When I arrived, the bus was already loading up. I saw my father and ran to him to get on the bus. "We're not going on the bus," he said. He had a mischievous look about him. I could tell he was up to something. Whatever he was up to, I was game. Nevertheless, I wanted to know how we would get home. "With this," he said, and he held out to me a set of car keys. He had bought me a car. It wasn't just a car. It was a car that most kids in the 50s would have lusted over. Chrome fittings, sunshade, steering knob, the whole thing. There was only one catch. I would be the family chauffeur, and I had to teach my mother how to drive. I had no problem with those duties. I had a car. But of course, there are hidden trappings to possessing a mighty machine. I was not prepared for the sense of power that such a machine could give. One night, I drove my car to a basketball game. After the game, and with a car full of my friends, we happened to pass another car that contained in it the cheerleaders for the opposing team. The adult woman driving the opposition's car gave us a dour look as we passed her. I slowed down in front of her so that the girls in the back seat could get a look at the, quote, sourpuss. She tried to pass us. "Don't let her pass," someone shouted, and I didn't. When we got to our small downtown area, I pulled into a parking spot right in front of the local teen hangout. When we got out, I was approached by the town marshal. I wasn't sure what I'd done. The others began giggling. Henry, the night marshal, was a joke to the teenagers around town. He kept an eye on all teenagers as though we were perpetually sitting around plotting mischief. We called him Henry the Hawk. And then Henry the Hawk proceeded to tell me what I had done. I had misused my car. I had obstructed passage of another car. I had done something not only dangerous, but quite stupid. Now, said Henry the Hawk, go home and tell your father that I will be right there. My friends stood around watching as I got into my car and drove home. Now I had to face my father. My father was sitting in the kitchen reading a newspaper when I walked in. I handed him my car keys. He wondered what had happened. I told him the whole story. I told him that I did not deserve to drive. Then Henry the Hawk knocked on the door. He told my father the whole story, exactly as I had told it. There were a few moments of silence when both men stood staring at me. Then my father reached out and handed me the car keys. She will never do that again, he said to Henry the Hawk, and I never did. Many years later, so this is where Cordova is wondering about how a way of living can be passed down unconsciously or unintentionally or passively absorbed. Um, Many years later, my own daughter confronted me with a similar situation. She came home early one afternoon from what was to be an afternoon at the park with friends. Here, she said to me and handed me the car keys. I cannot drive for 2 weeks. Did you wreck the car? I asked. No, she said, everything is fine. I just can't drive for 2 weeks. She offered no explanation, and I asked for none. If she had wanted to give an explanation, she would have done so. A few days later, I overheard a friend of my daughter's whispering to my daughter about the car. The friend assumed that I had, quote, grounded my daughter from use of the car. Couldn't you just tell her that we'd be right back? Begged the friend. My daughter responded, my mother has nothing to do with it. As I walked into the room, I saw on the friend a look of stunned silence. She couldn't imagine anyone grounding herself. How had I passed on to my daughter a way of acting that I had not specifically taught? How is it that I could now identify my own behavior in my children? There are many treatises on human behavior, and there are many on Indians. Nowhere did I see a recipe on how to end up as an autonomous adult. Who was I? How did I come to be what I was? What exactly did it mean to, quote, be Indian? Today, there are few Native Americans who can speak their own languages. It is often stated by scholars that unless one knows the language of a specific culture, one cannot know the culture. I grew up, as do so many Native Americans, without, quote, my own language. I also knew many Indians who did not act like Indians. What were the identifying factors? How is it that an identity could persist despite the concerted efforts to eradicate it? For 500 years, the European American population has tried to assimilate the Native American through secular education and through the many missionary efforts. The Native American has endured attempts of not only assimilation, but outright eradication of an entire culture. How and why did these attempts fail? All right, so I'm not sure how far into the recording are, but I've had a family member call me quite a few times. I'm not sure why. Um, Sunset is in 8 minutes, according to my watch, or in maybe less, in 3 minutes. Um, Timer also was not going, so let me check to see how many minutes we have left on the recording. So we are at 29, still going fine. It seems like you guys can still see pretty well into the valley. I'm gonna grab my phone at least and I can check text or something. Yeah, my Nana's just trying to call me. So I'm gonna call her back. Guys, I don't know what to tell you. I can't like sit facing away from this sunset and just read to you. I gotta look at this. That's one of the things that her dad will say in the next chapter with the sunrise. He says he goes to church every morning. She's like, nuh-uh. And so she goes with him, and then he points at the sun and says, there, that's my church. And then she's like, if I had ever seen a sunrise before then, I wasn't looking, and it didn't matter. And that was the first. It's like, I think she says it was the first sunrise she ever saw. And then she started helping her dad cook in the kitchen and stopped going to church in the morning on Sundays. It's beautiful, you guys. I'll be honest, I'm gonna face away for the rest of this, and yeah. But I had to turn around and make sure it's still recording, which super sucks. Oh, it feels nice. So we'd have like 20, maybe 25 minutes in this episode. I don't know how many pages we need to get through. We This next chapter is called The Bridge to America. We have 15 pages left, so I think if we get through maybe like 5 more pages in the next 20 minutes, that'll leave us with 10 pages for the next episode. Still recording, doing well. And Anyway, the bridge to America, coming to America. An ancestor of mine crossed the land bridge that spanned the Bering Strait 10,000, 30,000 years ago. The dates are disputed. When the Athabascan peoples made their crossing, there were already people on the American continent. We were the late arrivals. There are Athabascan peoples scattered from Alaska through Canada to the southwestern United States. I'm going to get a picture of this. Okay. My father's mother was born near Folsom, New Mexico. So we're thinking about the Athabascan people that arrived there and were already in Folsom. My father claims to be a descendant of Folsom man. The Folsom culture represents some of the oldest remains of early man on the continent. Who knows when my people arrived? When my great-grandfather confronted his first white man in the flesh, it was after the Americans had taken control of the Southwest from Mexico. This grandfather was mistaken for a, quote, Mexican. Who are you, old man, and where do you come from? Asked the white man. I am from here, said the grandfather, and I have always been here. Maybe not always, but being as how his memory had no thought of any other place, always was good enough. Sorry guys, I'm going to set a quick little timer. Maybe not always, but being as how his memory had no thought of any other place, always was good enough. The Taos people, living to the grandfather's southwest, had an interesting story of origin. They evolved out of a lake on top of Taos Mountain. The story was adopted by the Apache groups that came to be called the Jicarilla. The Taos people came out of the lake and wandered to the southwestern foot of the mountain. The Jicarilla people came out of the lake and headed northeast. So when we go, we'll be sure to go past Taos and check out northeast of it where the Jicarilla lived then. My father was born near what is now Trinchera, Colorado. Their home was on Romero Creek. Was the creek named after your family? I naively asked, since that was his family name. My father laughed. We're Indians. Most likely we were named after the creek. Some of his relatives had French names. Are you part French? I knew of his Spanish blood. Another laugh. The names are nothing. He smiled. We got names from whoever caught us and baptized us. Some were French priests, some were Spanish, and some were even Irish. Another chuckle. The names held. The religion was held in mild contempt. My father remained a pagan. He believed that the earth had created us through the fertilization of the sun, which is one way of describing like organic biochemical processes that are also sacred and profound and deep and divine, etc. Prove to me, he would say as he pointed to my science textbook from grade school, that there could be life without the sun or without the earth. He would sit back and smirk. Of course, he was right. I thought him the smartest person in the whole world. Many of my father's relatives married my mother's relatives. Not all of his relatives were Indians, and those who were, quote unquote, made up for their color with industriousness and charm. Although my father's features were those of La India, his coloring was that of his father. He was light enough to please the color and racial consciousness of his new in-laws, the Catholic woman that he married, right? The Cordova's mother. I grew up in extended family situations where cousins resembled each other, and our parents had complicated titles. My cousin Lena's father was my mother's cousin, but her mother was my father's cousin. She and I, on the other hand, resembled each other more than we resembled our respective siblings. Some of my father's relatives, quote unquote, forgot about their being Indians. My father couldn't forget. In 1914, his family left Colorado. They went to Arroyo Seco near Taos, New Mexico, his father's home. They could have gone to the Apache reservation in Dulce, New Mexico, maybe Dulce, New Mexico. But the reservations were viewed at that time as concentration camps. In Colorado, the Indian and Spanish communities had learned to get along in order to serve as a unified force against marauding Comanches, encroaching Frenchmen, and American intrusion. There was no such easy alliance in Arroyo Seco. My father was a half-breed. He was a foreign other. He could, as did so many of his cousins, give up his Indian identity, speak Spanish, go to church, and spend his time on the other side of the river. He refused. He was his mother's son. He did, however, speak Spanish. He did not mind leaving Taos at the age of 12. Just want to check levels. I think the light still looks good, honestly. Still got a lot of light on the horizon and on the valley. Wow, that's cool. I wish you guys could see that. Hmm. Years later, as an adult, I moved to Taos. I had grown up with the myth of Taos as quote-unquote home. It was the home of my mother's family for several generations. Old people told me stories about having bought their land from my mother's grandfather. My mother was Taos, specifically Arroyo Seco. I wanted to be there. So we'll check out Arroyo Seco too. I'm sure, I guess it's probably like a specific small town. And then one day I called my father, then living in happy retirement in Northern California near other Folsom people. Taos is racist, I moaned at my father. I knew that, he said. Why do you think I left? No sympathy there. I grew up in Wyoming and Idaho. Taos was where we went in summer to visit with relatives. So we're also going to go to Wyoming and Idaho. How cool is that? But I learned to know Taos like I knew my own face. Taos is where people looked like me. How could racism exist in Taos? Taos prides itself, or rather the Chamber of Commerce of Taos does, on its cultural diversity. 3 cultures living side by side, they say. We think that means they exist in some sort of communion. They don't. Indians stay with Indians, the Hispanics deal with Hispanics, and the Anglos are Anglos. And seldom do the two meet except on polite and superficial levels. Intermarriages occur, but the couple chooses which side to be on. The reason that 3 cultures exist side by side is that they don't really mix. Example. One of my deceased mother's favorite cousins lives in Arroyo Seco. Occasionally I would stop in to visit her, for my mother's sake. One day, after spending a particularly harrowing morning in the local laundromat in Taos, I decided to drop in on this cousin. I told her about my morning. I said I hated laundromats. I hated dealing with the people who frequented such places. The people I referred to were the leftover hippies. They arrived in Taos in the early 70s. They were dirty and they smelled. Their children were undisciplined and aggressive, and they hit the laundromats about once every 2 months with barrels of laundry. So she'll develop this to be self-critical of like how this isn't very different from the views that the prejudices people have against indigenous people. Um, when I was a child, gypsies would come through Taos in the summer. People locked their doors and swore that the chickens the gypsies sold door to door had been stolen from the local residents' own coops. The arrival of gypsies in town meant that children were cautioned. Be careful, a gypsy will steal you. Absolute fear. The hippies struck the same sort of fear in the local residents. Or so I thought. The people are so weird, I say to my cousin. It gives me the creeps. She nods in agreement and then she lets loose the zinger. Lots of Indians, too, I bet. Her nose turns up in disgust. I sit stunned. At the laundromat, I sat for safety with quote-unquote the Indians. We sat huddled in a corner, afraid perhaps that some sort of contamination, a contamination of license, immortality, a contamination of license, immorality, self-centeredness, dirt, disease, would waft through the used washing machines, from the hippie effluvia to ourselves. And now here was the beloved cousin, herself contaminated, as far as my mother's snobbish family was concerned, because she'd married a Mexican, turning her nose up at Indians. I was speechless. Had she forgotten, I wondered, that I was an Indian? That my father was an Indian? That his own mother was denied a name but my mother's relatives because they referred to her only as La India? And did you visit La India? My mother's relatives would ask me when we visited Taos in the summertime. They didn't ask my father, "How is your mother-in-law?" They asked about the Indian. I should have known. My father knew. I didn't say a word. I simply stopped dropping in. I was ashamed. Ashamed of what? I don't know. That I was a part of such a family? That this otherwise beloved cousin who prided herself on her devotion to the church was a racist? That she was a hypocrite? That I thought she would accept me for my mother's sake? Checking the levels again. Being an Indian wasn't an easy task. I thought it was just a fact of life, like the fact that I was so many feet tall, and so forth. I was an adult when I realized that my father was no longer afraid of being captured, found out as an Indian, and sent to the appropriate concentration camp. What could it have been like to live with this fear at the back of your mind all of the time? My father voted. He gladly paid his taxes. Every house we ever lived in looked better when we left it than when we moved in. He was a good neighbor. Aloof, said many people, but honest, hard-working, helpful, and never a problem. He was a good citizen. But my father was born before Indians were allowed to be citizens. He was voting before Indians were allowed to vote. He was never quite sure about the year he was born. He was afraid to look for a birth certificate because it might give him away as an Indian. He had never seen a birth certificate until the Social Security Administration found one for him when he applied for his pension. His birth had been recorded from church records. My father, his worst fears confirmed. That should probably be worse. That might be a typo in the book. Worse than what? I think they mean worst. Like, worst of all. My father, his worst fears confirmed, discovered he really had been baptized. Officially, he was a Catholic. My mother, had she still been living, would have derived a perverse pleasure from that fact. My mother was Spanish, not Mexican, her mother claimed. 22 years under the Mexican flag did not make her Mexican. Being Mexican was a fact involved with history, I was told. They had lived in northern New Spain. Their folk stories were filled with scenes. Just turning the page. Filled with scenes and stories about kings and queens and lovely princesses. Don Quixote was woven into all the storytelling, whether for adults or children. And we hear about the village dunce, Juan Bobo, whose escapades rivaled those of Coyote and Indian tales. Both served as examples of how a human being should not act. When I grew up and read the novel written by Cervantes, Don Quixote, I think, I discovered that many of the stories I'd heard from my grandmother were apocryphal, sort of sequels to the actual novel. She did, however, carry with her on her travels back and forth between New Mexico and Wyoming a hefty volume of Don Quixote, in Spanish and with illustrations. My maternal grandmother lived with us until she died. She was actually more of a mother than a grandmother, because my mother was in ill health. My mother was beautiful, demanding, and likely to die at any moment. My grandmother was nurturing, undemanding, accepting, and almost always on my father's side in intellectual conversations. The conversations were usually about Christianity and America. My mother was a devout Catholic. My grandmother was also a Catholic, but but of a different variety. She loved the church and hated priests and nuns. She chose to deny it, but there was a strong streak of the penitente cult in her belief system. The penitentes consisted of Catholics who chose to bypass the official administration of the Catholic Church. Here's some rustling, but I'm not sure what it is. This looks like it's still working well. Oh, but you guys can't see much anymore. Let's pop this bad boy on. How's that? That's something. So I think we got maybe like 5-10 minutes left. We're going to start that paragraph again. My mother was a devout Catholic. My grandmother was also a Catholic, her father's mother, right? But of a different variety. She loved the church and hated priests and nuns. She chose to deny it, but there was a strong streak of the penitente cult in her belief system. The penitentes consisted of Catholics who chose to bypass the official administration of the Catholic Church. They held their own services, their own pageants, and worked for the salvation of themselves and the world outside the pale of the church. She also approved of my father's paganism. I attended church services with my mother until I was about 7 or 8 years old. The attendance involved not so much Catholic ritual as the ritual involved in that attendance. It meant that on Saturday night, my sister, brother, and I had to endure the most intense cleaning we'd undergo through the whole week. Our ears were pulled and scrubbed, our hair was untangled, and, for my sister and me, put in unbearable curling contraptions that made sleep nearly impossible. On Sunday morning, we suffered part 2 of the torture. We were again polished and dressed in stiff clothes. My father dished out oatmeal, bacon, and pancakes, and commiserated with us. In silence, so as not to disrupt my mother's fanaticism. We looked to him through the corner of an eye from under an attack, with razor-sharp combs and hairpins. As long as he was willing to emit the slightest of smiles, we could keep ourselves from breaking out into revolution, or at least cries of pain. One Saturday night, I refused the ritual. I wasn't going to church. Daddy doesn't go, Daddy doesn't go. My mother, I swear, with scrub brush in her hand, leaned back from the communal bath in which my sister, brother, and I sat, and said to my father, in a most exasperated wail, "It's all your fault." I walked out of the tub, my grandmother toweled me, and my father let me sit on his lap. My brother and sister looked from me to my mother, and seemed to decide that though they admired my stance, they'd stick with it for a bit longer. So siblings not going to go along with it. Younger siblings. My mother scrubbed them twice as hard to make up for my loss to the ritual. My father, however, decided to dispute my claim about his not going to church. "I go every day," he claimed. It was just like something he'd say, simply to get an argument going. I said, "You don't either." "Yes, I do," he insisted, and even offered to take me the very next morning. I called his bluff. "It will be very early tomorrow morning," he said, as though to warn me off. "Well then," I said, "I'm going to bed right now, so I'll be ready." I heard him laughing as I marched off to bed. The next morning he was in my room before it was fully light. "Get up," he whispered. I literally jumped out of bed. Frantically, I asked, "What shall I wear? What shall I wear?" He grabbed my hand and a blanket off the bed at the same time. We walked quickly out of the house with the blanket wrapped around me. My father wasn't in his usual joking mood, and I asked no questions. We simply walked around to the back of the house. I looked to him to ask what this was all about, and he put his finger to his mouth and said, "Shh." He pointed to the hills beyond the house. A few seconds later, the sun appeared. My father pointed again. "See that?" he said, hushed but excited. "See that?" If I had ever seen sunbreak before, I was not aware of it. And now, there it was, and the sky was turning golden. I had seen it. I had seen the sunrise. "See that?" he asked again. "That is all you ever have to know." And I did know. I knew why my father was always up and about before anyone else, and why he was always so cheerful in the morning. I knew what he knew. From then on, I didn't participate in the Saturday night ritual torture, and on Sunday mornings, I helped with the oatmeal, the bacon, and the pancakes. My mother accepted this paganism just as her own mother had accepted it, but occasionally we would drive her to a point of exasperation and she would throw up her hands. Indians, she would lament. I'm stuck in a house full of Indians. Catholicism was something that existed in our household, but it wasn't an important thing. It was something that my mother and grandmother indulged in, sort of in the same realm as my grandmother's apocryphal Don Quixote and the romance magazines my mother read in the afternoons. What were important were the discussions that took place at our dinner table. We didn't know it at the time, but we practiced philosophy. My father would begin the conversations innocently enough. Eat your cow's feet. Cow's feet? We would recoil from the table, and at the same time look frantically about for the dish that could possibly hold such a horrid thing as a dismembered cow's hoof. Laughing at our reaction, my father would explain that Jello, that beautiful shimmery green stuff studded with fruit and nuts and marshmallows, waiting to reward us at the end of the meal, was made of cow's hooves. We demanded explanations. What we got were arguments over whether there was an advantage or disadvantage to the euphemistic uses of language. Disputes about whether language did or didn't conceal as much as it revealed, whether language and its use didn't actually display and perpetuate a particular view of the world, whether there were other possible views, and what those other views meant to the way we acted in the world. Eat your spinach, my father would say. It gave its life so that yours might continue. Wasting the spinach was an act of sacrilege to my father. I tried to chew as reverently as possible before getting out my query. What do you mean? Another provocative statement would proceed from my father. My mother and grandmother would either join in or quietly, so as not to disturb the discussion or make it hard to hear, clear the table and clean up the kitchen. The discussion seldom went beyond the dinner hour. My father, having stirred up a hornet's nest, would announce that he was going off to read the newspaper or do some chore. My sister, my brother, and I were left behind to mull over whatever had taken place. My father had only posed the issues. It was up to us to wrestle with them. I grew up in a world where questions were viewed not only as inevitable, but as fun. I grew into a world where questions were threats, and answers were something to cling to for dear life. I didn't so much leave my father's world as the other world intruded into our space. That other world, I was told and later found to be so, was the real world. I didn't come to America, I grew into it. In the next chapter, called America, she contrasts the Christian world with the real world, and neither of them are this playful and fun simplicity. This is such a beautiful fog setting over the valley. I think that's probably all of our time anyway. We'll start with that paragraph again about growing up in a world, these different worlds, and coming to America. I don't think we have all of. We only have a little over 2 pages left in this chapter, so but then the next chapter is really short too. Let me see how many minutes we're at on the video. I think we're probably over time. Oh yeah, 30 seconds shy of overtime. So we're gonna wrap it here, guys. Nope. But I can go get the lantern, and that'll be better for saying bye. This is fun. So I'll see you guys soon. Bye.